Welcome back to r/neighbors from hell, where people share stories about their crazy neighbors. And if you're new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our amazing community. And without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. The first one is titled HOA sued me for parking my pickup in my driveway. I defended myself and won. HOA lost $280,000. I know that probably half of you are looking over the title again to see if you actually read it right. Unfortunately, you did read it right, and it is not a typo either. I was actually sued by my HOA for parking my own truck in my own driveway on my own property. I guess I should give a little bit of context though, because it was not just like a lawsuit was dropped into my lap out of the blue. I live in a pretty nice area where most people have nice and usually expensive cars. Hell, I have my own BMW that mainly my wife uses to drive around. Working as an electrician though, I need more room than a normal car could give me, so for that I have my trusty pickup truck. I knew right away that this might have been a problem for the HOA, so I filled out a form and actually ended up getting permission easily to park my truck in my driveway. Well, that was years ago when I first moved in, and there was never any end date mentioned to that permission. I was allowed to park in my driveway, so that is what I did. I mean, really, I think most people would agree that is what the driveway is there for, and should not matter what kind of vehicle it is. Not to them though, because a few years later I got a letter from the HOA telling me that I needed to stop parking my truck in my driveway. I was honestly kind of shocked at this and wondering what they expected me to do about it. I was not going to put it in my garage because we used that mainly for storage, and trying to get the truck to fit in addition would have been a pain. I have a feeling though that by this point some of you are wondering why the hell was the HOA even getting a basis for telling me that I couldn't park my truck in the driveway. For that, I only have kind of a half answer that comes in the form of keeping the neighborhood appearance a certain way. If you have ever lived in a neighborhood like this or passed one, you would see all the cars and I guess assume that it was a safe neighborhood and the people were friendly. Honestly, I don't really understand that, but I totally get if some people do. My truck though, I guess, was an eyesore in comparison, and the look of it might make some people think it was an unsavory neighborhood. Honestly, I think that those rules were being used the wrong way by telling me I could not park my truck, and also seemed kind of discriminatory. I just would love to think what would happen if some family had a big van because of one of the members was in a wheelchair or something, and the HOA told them they could not park in the driveway. Back to reality though, I was clearly annoyed about this and had nowhere else to even park my truck. I basically kept doing what I was doing and letting the angry letters go from my mailbox to my garbage can. It's my property, and it is not like my truck is hurting anybody or being offensive. It is just a truck that honestly was cleaner than some of the people's expensive fancy cars. Finally though, I was sent a letter not by the HOA but from their lawyers that I was being sued for unpaid fines and breaking the bylaws. I guess the fines were those papers that I kept throwing out without even paying much attention to after the first few. I was actually surprised that they were trying to sue me for it instead of just letting it go, and realizing that I was not doing anything wrong. When we went to court, it actually went a lot faster than I thought it would. I was expecting them to take a ton of time making up stories and trying to prove that I was a neighbor from hell that deserved to be fined and kicked out of my house or something. Instead though, they were actually really honest and showed that they interpreted the rules for neighborhood beauty as having my truck needing to be parked in the garage. Then I talked about how there was nothing specifically about trucks in those bylaws, so they are taking the words and twisting them. It was found in my favor, and the HOA was actually going to have to pay my legal fees, which was totally awesome for me because I thought it would teach them a lesson. Instead though, they decided that they would appeal the decision and take it to a higher court. The entire time between the two cases, by the way, I kept receiving letters about fines and things like that. I kept ignoring them and spoke to my lawyer, and he said the best thing to do was avoid the HOA until court. They could not do anything to me until the case was resolved one way or another. It took over a year for us to get back into court and them to give their whole thing over again. This time I was even able to find the original approved application to park my truck in my driveway and that the HOA technically approved it. Since it did not show any type of expiration date and the truck was the same exact one, this fact kind of shot them in the foot. They could argue about what the bylaws meant between lawyers all day, but they could not argue that I had permission technically. Finally, in the end, I was able to stop being bothered by the HOA. They had to pay a grand total of $280,000 to me, all of which was lawyer fees from over that last year, and still, to be honest, the whole thing felt like a huge waste of time. I know that some people are fighting their HOA to do things to their lawns or get permission to make their houses bigger by adding an extension or something. Maybe if I was fighting for one of those things I would feel a little bit better, but keep in mind what I had just spent over a year in a legal battle to accomplish. Because of the ruling of 2 different judges, I was now allowed to park my truck on my own property. It really feels bittersweet when you have to fight and win just to do something that pretty much everyone with a driveway does on the daily. The only thing that really changed though was that now the HOA wanted to take out its revenge on me by raising the HOA yearly fees for the entire neighborhood to make up for the loss on paying for my lawyer. Even though it is a well-off neighborhood, nobody was happy about this price increase and they decided to direct all of that anger to me. Very subtly pointing out to everyone in the neighborhood that they needed to get the extra money because I took everything they had in a lawsuit. They did not want to give the details of the fact that they were actually the ones suing me and instead made me into the bad guy. A few neighbors listened to my side and agreed with me, but the rest mostly don't want anything to do with me anymore. The HOA went and ruined my reputation after I won the case, but I know in the future they are going to get what is coming to them. And yeah, ripe stars, I gotta say that is an insane HOA and I would go absolutely crazy if I had to live in a neighborhood like this. And in addition, I'm curious, could you ever imagine living in an HOA neighborhood after hearing all of these horror stories? Honestly, I would really be too afraid to even try it out, and it definitely wouldn't be worth it. Either way, if you enjoy the HOA stories, then please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post some star emojis in the comments if you wanna go the extra mile when it comes to supporting my channel. Thank you so much in advance, your support is very much appreciated. The next one is titled Grandpa Petty Revenge. Development has been taking over my hometown. It is inevitable, of course, as a lot of people from major cities further up north are moving down here, but it is sad at the same time seeing the fields and forests I used to play in growing up being paved over and turned into condominiums and strip malls. It has also caused the cost of living to increase tremendously in an area where many people are already struggling to stay afloat, so as you can imagine, my grandfather, an old stubborn Dutch man who moved here and lived on this property since the 50s, has something to say about it. The street my grandfather lives on used to be backed by a massive forest, but in recent years developers have bought all of the forest and 90% of it has been torn down except for this one small, probably 2-acre chunk of forest in the middle of this open field where my grandpa refuses to sell his land. Of course, this is bringing the developers' plans to a halt as they cannot pave and build around this single chunk of forest, so all they can really do is wait for him to sell his land. He has been in conflict with these developers for over a year now, and from my understanding, they are offering a lot of money. Well, knowing my grandpa for as long as he stands on this earth, absolutely no amount of money will convince him to sell that land. I know how frustrating this is for some people, specifically the developers who want nothing more than to throw up some cardboard houses and pocket close to $1 million per person, but I have decided that when my grandfather's time is up, I will continue his legacy and make sure that piece of land is never sold. That is my petty revenge. And the next one is titled I will take your inheritance. 25 years ago, my aunt passed away when I was a baby, leaving my two cousins who were both in their early 20s alone to fend for themselves. My grandparents, who were very wealthy, put a clause in their will that grandkids will receive half of their share of inheritance if a parent passes before the kids reach age 30, and then the other half when my grandparents eventually passed. Both my cousins received a very sizable inheritance coupled with the money they got from selling my aunt's house. The younger of the two paid off her college loans and was able to buy property. She still lives on the same plot of land. The older sibling blew all of his money straight out of a book of the Bible. Within 6 years he was back to living in a condo working as a police officer. Everyone in our small family knew he had a substance issue, so he was barely making ends meet with his officer salary and buying copious amounts of drugs. The next 4 years my cousin went to rehab 3 times, sponsored by my grandparents. He sobered up after getting his girlfriend, now wife, pregnant. Absolutely wretched woman. She saw my grandparents as payday and essentially baby-trapped my cousin, thinking it was her ticket. Within 7 years they had 3 kids, so she is locked in tight. She is a nurse with 3 kids around and they always needed a little boost. Guess who they would always ask? You got it, my grandparents. Being the kind spirits they are, they always lended a hand. My father, mother, sister and I got sick of it very quickly. My grandma unfortunately passed away when I was 17, leaving my grandpa as the last remaining. I was undoubtedly my grandfather's favorite among the grandkids, which left a real sore spot in the mouth of my cousin and his wife. I had 2 more years at home before college, so I lived with my grandpa to keep him company and help take care of him. My cousin and his wife hated this so much so that whenever they came to visit and I was not home, they would send their 3 gremlins into my room to destroy it. My room had double doors, so it could not be locked. This was the start. The longer I lived there, the more they would mess with me. My cousin even went as far as to place one of those little mechanical noisemakers in the cabinet in my room, the ones that play sounds at random intervals that make you think you're insane. Thankfully, my German Shepherd would always hear it, and after a week or so, she finally found it. They did this to distance me and deter me from taking care of Grandpa so they could swoop in and be the heroes. This continued until one of the kids found my gun. By this time, I was 18 and in the possession of a firearm. I use quotations because my grandpa has guns but cannot aim and shoot them anymore due to arthritis and nerve degeneration, so when I moved in, he placed all the weapons in my hands should the need of self-defense arise. But should he see them out for any reason other than cleaning, there would be hell to raise. Being very well trained with guns and having a sense of pride in defending my home, I took this responsibility very seriously. I always kept a handgun in a locked container in my nightstand with the key on a high shelf out of reach from the gremlins. One fateful day, I am out getting my grandpa food, and when I come home and my older cousin, his wife and my grandpa are staring at a gun on the table. It was my gun that I kept in the lockbox. It was loaded and had a bullet chambered. I always keep a magazine in the lockbox but never load it into the gun. The lockbox was nowhere to be seen. My cousin claimed one of the children found the gun and was playing with it. I was 100% certain that he either found the key or broke the lockbox open to get to it and load it, as a 6-year-old would not be able to reach a key I could barely grab, figure out what it was for, and load my gun and chamber it. I tried my best to explain what my cousin had said was BS and that I never keep my firearms loaded in the house, but my cousin, who is a cop, scolded me on gun safety and threatened to have me arrested if I didn't leave, and hadn't arrested me yet because we are family. I was asked to collect my belongings and go back to my parents. My cousin had won, or so he thought. The next day, I apologized to Grandpa and explained to him there was no way one of the kids could have gotten the key. He agreed with me and he apologized, but he thought it was best that I move out until things cool down, but once they do, I would be welcome back home. Our relationship was a little fractured due to disinformation provided by my cousin. A month later, my grandpa died of a heart attack at 86. I was devastated. I was just beginning to get back into the rhythm with him and rebuilding the trust that was somewhat shattered. To this day, I am still unsure of what kind of man he saw me as due to my cousin. Immediately, my cousin and his wife began sucking up to my dad as they had sealed payday with grandpa. It was time to move on to uncle. This persisted for a month or two, I would not stand for it, and then came time for the will. My grandpa's lawyers read out the will to me, my father, mother and sister in our home. Our two cousins would be briefed individually on their share of the estate per my grandparents' requests. And then the miracle line in the will comes to fruition. If anyone attempts to claim any part of the estate that is not assigned to them, they forfeit any assets they are supposed to receive and will be divided equally among the remaining family members. This was basically their way of saying, if you try to claim more than you are given, you get nothing. My father is supposed to receive every piece of physical property, aside from 2 or 3 items he set aside for me, from my grandparents, as he is the only remaining child. And now, the revenge. I hatched my plan. I called my cousin and told him all of my grandma's jewelry was to be donated to a charity auction. Grandma's collection of gems and metals was extensive to say the least, so a charity event would not care if a few pieces did not make it, right? It was a lure of gargantuan proportions that my greedy dude of a cousin could not resist. He bit right on it and headed over to my grandparents' house ASAP. Determined to snatch up as much as he could, a handful would send his kids to college. Regardless of what I said, the jewelry was never going to go to him anyways, so his actions were purely his own since none of it was destined to be his. Coincidentally, Dad was on his way with the lawyer to my grandparents' house to overlook everything, formality stuff. According to my dad's testimony, my cousin had 3 shoeboxes worth of grandma and grandpa's jewelry piled on the kitchen counter, ready for loading into his car. My dad and the lawyer stood in the kitchen wondering why it was all there when my cousin walks in from my grandparents' bedroom with a 4th and final shoebox. The jig was up and he put 2 and 2 together that I set him up, which was true. But there was no penalty against me for exploiting my cousin's greed so he would F himself over. It is worth noting that between the 18 years from my aunt's death and my grandpa's death, their wealth had increased several times over, so my cousin felt cheated and expected to receive just as much as my sister and I, despite receiving half of his already and blowing it. Throughout this whole ordeal, his younger sister, my other cousin, has not had a problem at all and is still weeping over grandpa's death like the rest of us. However, just like that, my cousin lost enough money in the course of 30 minutes that made him contemplate his sanity over greed. My cousin's witch of a wife apparently filed for divorce a few weeks later. We have not heard from him in nearly 6 years as he is all but disgraced now. You can call this a fairy tale ending, and on this particular part of the story it somewhat is. There was a massive lawsuit by an unknown family member involving the IRS and FBI later on, but honestly, I would rather have my grandparents. Leave comments if you want the other part of the story, but it is not really a revenge story. And ripe stars, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you still cannot get enough of my content, then I would highly suggest to check out my endless binge watch playlist, which will soon show up in the left corner of the screen. In addition, I would really appreciate it if you could not only subscribe to the channel but also turn on the bell notifications, which you can do by clicking on the little bell icon right next to the subscribe button. This will help my channel tremendously and this will make sure that you don't miss any of my videos. Furthermore, if you want to see additional ripe content that I don't post on YouTube, then I would suggest to head on over to patreon.com/ripeyoutube for more than 50 exclusive videos that you will not see anywhere else. Thank you so much for your amazing daily support and I hope to see you again tomorrow.